A sit-in is a form of direct action that involves one or more people occupying an area for a protest. In the segregated communities, blacks were not allowed to eat at white-only lunch counters. The sit-in movement was a huge blow for civil rights. It eliminated forms of discrimination. Segregated lunch counters were common in the South because of numerous Jim Crow laws, which also kept public buildings and sites like libraries, parks, theaters, swimming pools, and water fountains segregated. The sit-in protest drew public attention to these injustices through nonviolent civil disobedience.
On February 1st, 1960, 4 black students sat down at a lunch counter reserved for whites in Greensboro, North Carolina. When Joseph McNeil, Ezell Blair, Franklin McCain, and David Richmond were denied service and asked to leave, they politely refused and remained in their seats until the counter closed.
The following days after February 1st, more and more students joined in the sit-ins. It attracted the local media, the newspaper, and TV. Reports covering the protests allowed people to hear about the event that took place, making this one of the most important sit-ins of the civil rights movement.
These 4 young men decided it was time for someone to change the situation in Greensboro. They knew the reward outweighed the risk, and that the young black men and women needed to help with their involvement in the fight against segregation. This set the stage for similar sit-ins around the country.
The sit-ins spread like wildfire throughout the South within a few months. More than 55 cities in 13 states were participating or supporting the sit-in movement. The sit-ins provoked the type of reaction the civil rights movement wanted. Behind the philosophy of nonviolence, blacks believed that some change would come if enough people witnessed the violence the blacks endured.
James Lawson, who studied nonviolence with Gandhi in India, organized workshops to teach the students how to endure the beatings and harassment but maintain their self-control and dignity. The students had to learn to speak politely, respond respectfully, while being called demeaning names and taking beatings.
Students of the Jim Lawson workshops had to pass training to participate in actual sit-ins. While training, they endured many hardships, while being harassed by others and practicing the fetal position to protect their head when getting kicked.
On February 13th, Jim Lawson and others launched the Nashville sit-ins to challenge segregation in downtown Nashville. The students sat in, finishing their homework and studying. Hundreds joined the sit-in, making it the largest, best organized, and most disciplined protest of the movement.
Usually teenagers gathered around the protesters and heckled, harassed, and beat them. The gangs were predominantly white and harassed the students by burning them with lit cigarettes and pulling them out of their seats while beating them.
During the sit-ins, the police would sit back and watch the students be pulled from their seats and beaten in a mob of whites. After the students were beaten, the police would arrest them and carry them off to jail. They would serve their time in jail rather than paying the fine because some of them believed they would be supporting the injustice performed in the arrest.
A few days after February 13th, the black citizens of Nashville started a boycott on all the downtown businesses associated with segregation. The boycott spread all across the country. People started picket lines in front of stores. The boycott was very effective, forcing the sit-in stores to integrate or force bankruptcy. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was founded in April 1960 by young people who had emerged as leaders of the sit-in protest movement, initiated on February 1st. These students remained fiercely independent of King and generated their own projects. Through her involvement with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Diane Nash worked closely with Martin Luther King. In 1962, King nominated Nash for a Civil Rights Award sponsored by the New York branch of the NAACP to acknowledge her exemplary role in the student sit-ins. Alexander Luby was a lawyer for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. His house was bombed early in the morning of April 19, 1960. Luby and his wife were not harmed in the attack, but this angered many nonviolent protesters. Later that day, after Luby's house was bombed, nearly 4,000 people marched to City Hall to confront Mayor Ben West about the escalating violence. After protesters marched on City Hall, the mayor calls for desegregation of the lunch counters.
Diane Nash confronted Mayor West on the steps of City Hall. Nash asked Mayor West, "Do you feel it is wrong to discriminate a person solely on the basis of their race or color?" Her public confrontation with Mayor West accelerated the desegregation of Nashville's lunch counters and public facilities. In Atlanta, Georgia, some student sit-in leaders convinced Dr. King to participate in the sit-in. He was very impressed by the youth's peaceful protest and their training in nonviolence. He believed it was a very electrifying movement for the black youth. Dr. King was arrested, but the sit-in charges were dropped. But he was still thrown in jail for violating his probation that he did not know about. President candidate John F. Kennedy got King released on bail. This worked in his favor, and Kennedy was elected president a few weeks later.
The sit-ins of 1960 provoked all manner of emotions when they occurred, and they remain an important part of civil rights history. The idea of nonviolence and peaceful protests provoked the type of reaction the civil rights movement wanted. Unfortunately, history has a way of repeating itself.